Lovely to see you today. Thank you very much for joining me. I want today simply to encourage you to do what I think for most of us should be a relatively simple thing. It is just this. I'm going to take it off to continue speaking to you if you don't mind, but I want to encourage you, particularly when you go to a shop, and indeed also when, God willing, if you're fit and able, you come to church, to wear your mask, and I'm sure there are other contexts where it's fitting and appropriate to do so too. I recognise, of course, that there are exceptions. It might be that you whether one of those legitimately apply to you, in which case you're not expected to wear it, and that's fair enough. But for those of us who do not fall within the exemptions or the exceptions, I want to encourage you as an act of Christian discipleship for the glory of Jesus Christ to put your mask on. When it comes to church buildings, the government have not made it compulsory. You're not breaking the law by entering a church service without a mask on, but the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, along with several other churches this past week, and perhaps others will follow suit, have made the decision that we encourage and recommend the wearing of masks at public worship, and certainly maybe not this Sunday, but in the weeks that follow, masks will be available in our congregations in the vestibule. I hope also in Guildford and Tullylish, and if you haven't got your own before, there'll be an opportunity to get one there. Why should we do it? Well, I think actually the answer to that is very simple. There's been all sorts of discussion, as you're well aware, and myself having a legal background, studied law at Queen's many moons ago, I'm fascinated by some of the conversations, not least on the whole area of enforcement. But when it comes to a biblical perspective and the biblical question as to what I, as a disciple of Jesus, should do, I think actually the answer is very clear. The reality is that the government wants people to do this. Whether it can try to make it obligatory or whether it can simply recommend it is another question. But there's no doubt that the government does want this to be part of our national response to this stage of the pandemic. And as Christians, I think we ought to respect their decision in that and do our best to adhere to it. Here's why. Romans 13, verse 1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do what is right, but for those who do what is wrong. Do you want to be free of fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is right and you'll be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore it's necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honour, then honour. There may well be some questions about the detail of what Paul means there and its particular application in some circumstances. It does not, of course, mean that governments are beyond criticism. It does not, of course, mean that their actions should not be scrutinised. And this video does not in any way mean that I am flying the flag for any particular government or any particular party that constitutes or is part of a government. I'm not doing that at all. I am simply pointing out that the Bible here clearly teaches that we ought to respect the government's authority, whatever government happens to be over us in the place where we live. There are, of course, some exceptions. There are times when it's the legitimately Christian thing to go against the government. You might think of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the book of Daniel, or even Peter in the book of Acts saying we must obey God rather than man. But those exceptions only come in where to obey the government would be to disobey God. The question of face masks, that issue does not rear its head at all. The government have urged us to do this, and whatever we may think of any government, we ought to accept what God by His Spirit says here, and therefore we ought to comply with what the government requests in this regard. Put your masks on for the Lord. In light of His glory, in response to His grace, put your mask on for the Lord.